this is about to get dangerous as we delve beneath the surface of My Hero Academia's iceberg into the chill waters beneath to uncover what mysteries, bits of lore, and interesting information lie hidden beneath the waves. And here's where I want to warn you again that this is a trip all the way down to the abyss of My Hero Academia. So are you prepared to venture down? But first, in the last video, we promised to discuss the true identity of a character that has lingered in the background of the story this entire time, with nowhere near as much presence as they should have, and that character is Hisashi Midoriya. The mystery of Hisashi Midoriya, otherwise known as Deku's dad, is a big one to unpack, with theories ranging everywhere from him just being some random guy, to a bad father or a deadbeat, with some people even suggesting that he's the US president or works for their government to send money back to his wife and son. We actually don't know much about Hisashi, since not only is he not present in the story physically, Deku has only ever thought about or mentioned his dad once or twice in the entire series of MHA in ways that don't give us any more information than what Inko could have told Deku about him. And we've seen flashbacks of Deku at a very young age, but we've never seen his father in these flashbacks. On top of this, Deku has never been contacted by his father over the entire time the story has taken place, despite Deku doing some actually notable things that would be likely to get his dad's attention if he cared. Deku not only got into UA with a quirk, but he also placed high in the sports festival and was involved in several conflicts that Inko would definitely let Hisashi know about in her concern, as well as the whole situation with All Might training their son. I also want you to consider the fact every time that Deku's been in a really troublesome situation where he didn't know if he was going to get out of it, and out of all the times where he thought about the people that he cared about that he wanted to survive for, like Bakugo or his friends or his mom or All Might, why has he never ever pictured his dad in his head? This paints the picture that Hisashi has actually been gone for most of Deku's life and hasn't returned despite his family being in danger. And as far as we've seen, he's never made an attempt to personally support Deku or Inko beyond the potential money that he sends the family. Now this has led to the most popular theory for Hisashi Midoriya being the dad for one theory, the theory that All for One is Hisashi, which I say is the most popular theory, but it's at least the most well known. I won't necessarily say it's the most popular. Now I often get credited with the creation of this theory, and I've been one of its loudest and strongest supporters as I've tried to piece together everything over the course of the series that could be a clue from the story, to the point where now the theory has so many new layers that it's just sort of become an entirely new monster. To keep it brief though, here are some supporting arguments that you might not have heard about before regarding Dad for One. First off, every character in My Hero Academia has characters in Japanese in their name that hint towards their identity and their quirk, like how Bakugo has the word explosion in his name, or the One for All users all have the number that they represent in the order of quirks. Knowing that quirks tie deeply in the personality, this also means that names also have information about a person's personality hidden within. Hisashi Midoriya is said to be a man of a fire-breathing quirk, yet unlike any other fire user in the series, he actually has no characters for anything heat-related or fire-related in his name. Instead, Hisashi has characters that can be interpreted into words like eternal, master, head, eldest brother, to exalt or honor, and to wield or be in control of. These would obviously tie into the fact that All for One is an elder brother who has the power to honor someone with a quirk or wield it himself, as the master of the villains and anyone in his control. But I also think that the head thing is funny there, since All for One's chief attribute is his potato head. Now maybe you're wondering what I could get from Hisashi's last name, but that's the thing, we might not even know his last name. And for All for One, we actually do know All for One's true last name, but not his first name. Now the reason that I say that we might not know Hisashi's family name is because in Japan, it's not uncommon for men to take their wife's last name for various reasons, and we've even seen this in the story of MHA with Jiro's parents. And with the family name Midoriya having the word Midori in it, which means green, it's likely that this did come from Inko, since she shares Deku's green hair, and I highly doubt that Deku's parents will both have the exact same color hair. If this is the case, then that means that Hisashi's true family name might actually be Shigaraki, like All for One told Tenko his real last name was. And it seems like this is just a connection that Horikoshi is waiting to make, revealing that Deku's father is Hisashi Shigaraki, also known as All for One. But moving away from that, what else can we find underneath the water surface as we explore this iceberg? Omagadoki Zoo. My Hero Academia isn't Horikoshi's first serialized manga, as before his work on My Hero Academia, he worked on a series called Omagadoki Zoo, and several of the characters from this series would go on to be included in the cast of My Hero Academia, with Hori sprinkling in more and more as the story goes on. The notable characters that carried over from series to series are Gang Orca, Uwabami, Shishido, Toy Toy the Poodle, and others like the main characters who've appeared not only in episode 1 of the anime, but here and at several points in the movies and anime as background characters. The story of the manga follows Hana Aoi as she tries to find a job and ends up working at a strange zoo where, thanks to the owner Shina, all of the animals become humanized sorts of hybrids under the light of the moon, in order to work together to spread the fame of the zoo, trying to either lift their curses or destroy the zoo. Shina, the main character, shares a lot of visual and narrative similarities to Shigaraki from My Hero Academia, as you can see here, and we've even seen Shina's scarf in a color page for Mirko during the war arc. This series is probably why Horikoshi has such a fondness for creating My Hero Academia heroes that do have animal powers, and you can even see in characters like Deku that don't have animal powers that Horikoshi will often tie them to some sort of animal, just like how Deku is often symbolized as a rabbit or a hare at times. Horikoshi and hands. Hands are notoriously difficult for a mangaka to draw. Heck, even AI find it absolutely impossible for some reason, but once in a while, a mangaka comes along that is just such a ridiculously meme-worthy giga-chad that they say, hands? I love them, give me all the hands. And for Horikoshi, who is literally quoted with saying, I drew this chapter while thinking it'd be nice to have lots of hands, I want lots of hands, this statement is absolutely true. Horikoshi has showed off a love of drawing hands even before his work on My Hero Academia, as some of his public arts that he released online before the series started featured monsters made out of hands and highly detailed hands on his characters. But where does this inspiration come from? Well, Horikoshi's hands are actually inspired by Mike Mignola's hands on the popular comic series Hellboy. Mike in general draws very squared off fingers and really expressive and interesting hands and anatomy, and Horikoshi modeled the squared fingers and overall aesthetic of his hands on those of the legendary comic artists. Now, things in the manga have gotten to a point where it seems like Horikoshi's love of hands isn't just a meme anymore, and honestly it seems like he really does love everything to do with drawing hands and fingers, because he's given a character the ability to spawn and generate a grotesque assortment of hands and limbs and waves of fingers from all over that literally fill up the page. And when discussing his obsession with hands, Horikoshi had this to say about the topic. He says, I like drawing hands. I give them a lot of care because besides the face, I think that hands are the body part most capable of showing expression and character. On the flip side, drawing hands that aren't expressive is especially tough because there's nothing to go on. For that reason, there's one character in this volume who's especially difficult to draw and who had me on the verge of tears every week. It makes me resent myself. It'll be plenty obvious to any reader which character I'm referring to, so go on ahead. Read on. Of course, in this volume, Horikoshi was referring to Shigaraki's dead hands, so I'm sure he was excited to give Shigaraki a horde of living hands. Horikoshi's Mascot. Speaking of hands, I suppose one major hint that Horikoshi is Yoshikage Kira is the fact that his own mascot is a hand, or should I say, was. Have you noticed that Horikoshi's mascot has actually been slowly evolving over the course of My Hero Academia? For a long time, it was a hand coming out of another hand that it wore as a glove or pants, and the top hand had a small mask of holes for the eyes, nose, and mouth. From time to time, we'd get alterations from the norm with the hand in different positions, but slowly over time, Horikoshi started to sprinkle in strange changes like sharper fingers and nails and small design changes. Eventually though, as we near the end of the series, Horikoshi's hand would start to transform into what seemed like its final state as it began to truly evolve. First, on volume 29, we see that the small mass that is usually in the center of the mascot actually sprouts out of the center of the palm, growing teeth and splitting the mascot in half, as the halves of the hand seem to form some sort of wings or arms for the creature. Then on volume 30, we can see that the pink mass part of the hand has now swelled up and is starting to push itself out of the bluish-green hand that it was originally nested in, with warped fingers appearing from this strange caterpillar-like creature's sides and a more pronounced set of teeth. On volume 31, Horikoshi's mascot is now properly fusing together with the lower hand section, which has formed its fingers into feet, hands, and a tail for the odd creature. And we can see that the mask on its head has now split into two halves, with the original eye holes for the mouth and eyes becoming the creature's new double pair of eyes, as the pink coloration starts to further spread down the body of the mascot. On volume 32, we see a fully formed new creature with pink skin and fully realized legs and arms, along with a tail that has its own fingers now and a large fingernail still on the end. The creature is really strange, but we'll discuss where I think Horikoshi is going with this in a second. On volume 33, it bites onto the ground and starts to fold in on itself, taking a slightly familiar shape, with volume 34 making it clear exactly what's happening as the pieces of the mask reunite once again to form Horikoshi's original mask, and the overall mascot starts to take the rough shape of Horikoshi's old mascot again. And voila! By volume 35, Horikoshi's mascot is renewed completely back to normal. But what was this about? Well, Horikoshi did make statements that after My Hero Academia is over, he wants to potentially write a horror series. And with all the body horror that we've seen in the series as it's gone on, and the evolution of his mascot, could this evolution of his mascot be hinting at the actual evolution of the author as he looks forward to his next work? Horikoshi's editors. Up until very recently, Horikoshi has only had 4 editors over the course of My Hero Academia. There's Koike, Monji, Yoritomi, and Taguchi. I'll link a Twitter thread where the 4 of them do an interview together, but many may not know these names behind the legendary manga who've all made their own contributions to the series over a specific section, with Koike being the editor starting from a year before serialization up until the 3rd chapter, Monji handling the period from chapter 4 until the Culture Festival, my personal favorite Yoritomi who handled the manga from the Pro Heroes arc all the way to the end of the war, and most recently we had Taguchi, the editor who faced the most fan backlash and my personal least favorite from the bunch. Also, he was the Samurai 8 editor, and that tells you pretty much everything you have to know. But Taguchi handled the manga from the Dark Deku arc all the way until the start of the most recent final arc. And finally, there is the current and most likely final editor of the series, Imamura, who previously worked on Ayakashi Triangle. From the editors, we learned that there were a lot of drafts of My Hero Academia where Deku was quirkless, but they wanted them to have a power, so Horikoshi had to create one for all. Apparently, Koike and Horikoshi were super confident in chapter 1 and 3 before the manga actually began, but they had to work super hard to make chapter 2 as good as they wanted. And this work actually paid off because eventually legendary Naruto author Masashi Kishimoto would comment that he really liked chapter 2 of the series. And the editors all also comment on the fact that Horikoshi's character designs are always so perfect that they never need to tell him to change anything, but that he toils over them for way too long, and sometimes, like with Endeavor's new hero costume, it took Horikoshi so long to decide that he actually ended up drawing the rest of the top 10 heroes for the first time while making the chapter. So in a way, he met the rest of the top 10 heroes at the same time that we did. Mirio couldn't take One for All. Many fans know that Mirio was All Might's original choice to get One for All instead of Deku, but everything changed when Deku saved Bakugo and proved to All Might that he deserved to be a hero and get the quirk more than someone who already had their own quirk. Well, Night Eye seems really angry over this decision initially and won't accept it, but could Deku have accidentally saved Mirio from the biggest unintentional setup in the world? All Might doesn't have much knowledge about the inner workings of One for All, but eventually the past users tell Deku that someone born with a quirk has a limited lifespan because of the power within One for All affecting their body, meaning cracks will start to form and they'll pass of old age before their 60s. Now this was true all the way back in the 4th generation of One for All, so by the current generation, after All Might has massively supercharged the quirk during his time with it, imagine what it would have done to Mirio. Sure, there would have probably been a few months where he'd be able to use the quirk, but much like Hikage Shinomori and potentially even to a larger degree, Mirio's lifespan would be shortened and he would have run the risk of completely cracking apart like Shigaraki during the war from the sheer power of One for All and his original quirk existing together in his body. Just something to think about next time you wish Mirio got One for All. Hero agencies. Have you ever wondered how hero agencies work in MHA? Hero agencies are a headquarters or a place of business where a hero can gather their own force of sidekicks and employees to handle the other aspects of hero work or to broaden the range of a hero's capabilities in the field. In the anime, we've seen Endeavor's hero agency, as well as the ones belonging to various heroes associated with the internships our students took in the early seasons, like Fatgum's agency or Fourth Kinds. For some heroes, these agencies can be quaint offices of just a few members like Night Eye's agency, Agency, while others like Endeavor have a large tower with fire heroes and all sorts of supportive workers. We don't ever see it in the anime, but did you know that All Might also has a hero agency called Might Tower? This massive skyscraper has a globe on top of it with rings around it like a protective shield, and is probably the biggest building we've ever seen in My Hero Academia. So you can only imagine how many people All Might employed at this office for the world's #1 hero. Now, hero agencies are the government solution to vigilantes, as during the rise of quirks, vigilantes became very popular for dealing with villains who the police by law wouldn't use their quirks against. So giving the vigilantes a state-sanctioned way to fight villains of laws and standards that they have to follow allows for an overall better managed system in quirk-based society. For the heroes, one of the big incentives is the government's funding that these agencies receive, which based on their level of experience and efficiency enables some heroes to craft these massive buildings and workforces in the name of saving the people. But we know that some people absolutely don't see it that way, and some people like Getten from the Liberation Army see the heroes as dogs of the state. Heroes replace celebrities. On the other end of the spectrum of whether or not you like heroes, we have most of the public for about 80% of My Hero Academia. Despite saving people being the core of what a hero is supposed to be, that's not all that matters. And in My Hero Academia, the heroes have taken over the role of celebrities in our society, as they do everything from talk show appearances to advertising products, and at the top we've seen heroes like Endeavor, All Might, and Best Jeanist are some of the richest people we've ever seen in the series, so it obviously pays to be a hero. This is partially due to the funding that heroes get from their government through their agencies that gets passed down from the head hero at the office to all the sidekicks and all the employees. But like we mentioned, heroes also advertise products and end up on TV, and in the back of volumes of My Hero Academia, we can actually find examples of several ads for hero-based products within the world of My Hero. We have Lady Hair Shampoo and Conditioner by Mount Lady, an ad for the USJ Center by 13, of course for Midnight she advertised her own perfume fragrance, while Present Mike's ad was for his broadcast station, Put Your Hands Up Radio. Endeavor's ad was for Burning Black Canned Coffee, which is probably just a black canned coffee with some sort of hot sauce or chili mixed into it. And just to name a couple others, we've seen Jeanist advertising jeans, of course, Hawks advertising a watch, and even Mirko advertising some weird carrot juice concentrate apparently made from over 60,000 carrots, which I bet would just turn you orange if you had enough of it. The Todoroki Family. The Todoroki family is at the heart of the My Hero story, with the plotline staying relevant throughout the series. Of course, one of the large driving factors is the Dabius Toya theory, and ultimately the plotline surrounding just what happened to Toya to cause him to end up like he has, leading to his conflicts with other members of the Todoroki family. Now, as far as other members of the family, Rei's family is still quite shrouded in mystery, since we've never seen another member of the Homura family in the story, despite them alleging to be prestigious at some point. However, fans have theorized that Getten from the Paranormal Liberation Front could be a lost Homura family member that could be a distant relative of Shoto's, and Getten's white hair, orphan status, and ice quirk does seem to support that idea somewhat, as well as the fact that reality to him is all about making his quirk strong, which means he could come from a very similar living situation to the Endeavor and Rei situation. Another thing that I really love about the Todoroki family is how the Todoroki siblings are all representations of different ways that someone can deal with what Endeavor has done. Shoto represents someone who can't forget, but can forgive. Fuyumi is someone who can forget and can forgive to try to make the future better. Natsuo is someone who wants to be around his family without Endeavor, and only recently has started to accept them back into his life. And Toya is someone who can't forget or forgive, and not only does he not want to be around his family anymore, but he only wants to be around Endeavor and Shoto so he can take them down with him in a pile of ashes. And lost somewhere in the symbolism of all this, we have Rei's favorite flower, which is the Rindo, which Endeavor sends to her room in the hospital, as it symbolizes loving someone who is sorrowful, which applies to Endeavor's love for Rei despite everything that has happened, but also with the blue petals and some of the symbolism that's been used in the anime, it's easy to see how this flower could also symbolize Toya and his flames, and how despite being something that would destroy the flower, Endeavor still loves his son and wishes for him to return home even if he can't be there to enjoy it. The Cloud. During the final war arc, we've seen a massive cloud start to form over Japan thanks to the battles taking place in different areas between fire users like Endeavor vs All for One, Shoto vs Toya, and to a lesser extent I'm sure, but also Bakugo vs Shigaraki, where Bakugo hits Shigaraki with a massive explosion. The cloud has gotten a lot of focus, and we've even seen that the US Weather Service is covering the massive cloud event, saying that it could potentially do a lot of damage if it combines with a tropical storm on the east coast of Japan. This cloud is a direct threat to the rest of the world, coming as a consequence of them not lending a hand to the heroes against Shigaraki and All for One. Because when you look at the situation, if the rest of the world sent literally any help, this would have been all wrapped up already. So in a way, it's poetic that the battle is now spilling out over onto them, but is Horikoshi really gonna do that? Some people have speculated that this cloud is just a plot device to give us more focus on other areas, but why are we starting to turn away to countries like the US as this series is wrapping up? This has made people, including myself, question if it's secretly a hint that winds are blowing overseas, and MHA might actually continue in a new country where a lot seems to be being set up. Or is the cloud itself just a threat that Deku will naturally deal with during the fight against Shigaraki, with a powerful 100% smash going up into the sky that completely destroys this massive country-sized cloud, changing the weather much like All Might did in the first chapter. Sky High. Ever since the series began, MHA has drawn comparisons to another existing property known as Sky High, the movie. Here's a synopsis of the film. It tells the story of a boy named Will Stronghold, the son of two superheroes, who is enrolled in an airborne high school for teenage superheroes where his powers kick in. He must deal with a growing distance from his old friends, a threat from a mysterious supervillain, and get the girl of his dreams. Now there are a number of parallels between My Hero Academia and the movie. Both take place with a superhero high school as the backdrop. Both protagonists start with no powers but eventually develop powers that boost their strength and speed. There's a teacher who is literally just Present Mike with the same ability and everything. The rival uses explosions, and of course there's live action All Might, also known as the Commander. Yeah, there's that. Now, I've seen online that Horikoshi has apparently denied any purposeful connection between the two properties, but I mean, come on. It's like that other cartoon that Horikoshi says he doesn't know existed, with some clear parallels to MHA, but we'll discuss that one a little bit later. My Hero Academia School Briefs. Previously, we've discussed the My Hero Academia spin-offs, Vigilantes, and Team Up Mission, but that's not where the MHA gravy train ends, because Horikoshi has also illustrated several My Hero Academia novels called My Hero Academia School Briefs. In these novels, we get to look at all the in-between that happens when we aren't watching our heroes to fill in the story and flesh out the characters way more. In these novels, you get a way better feel for who the characters are personality-wise and see them in a lot of diverse situations because the books don't have to account for what could be taking too long for an anime episode or what wouldn't fit on a manga page. We've seen stuff like Shoto's meeting with his mother in the earlier seasons that we didn't get to see in the anime, as well as things like a regular day in the life for the UA teachers and what they get up to, several trips where the UA class goes to places like the theme park, shopping, and other cool hangout sessions, how the heroes prepared for the overhaul raid, details on Class 1B's play during the Culture Festival, which was titled Romeo and Juliet and the Return of the Prisoner King of Azkaban. And overall, there's just a lot of stuff that goes on in these books that just make for a lot of interesting, fun side stories in MHA. Now, let me know if you want me to cover My Hero Academia School Briefs content on the channel, because I'd honestly love to take a few chapters or something and turn them into story videos perhaps, but only if you want to know what the class has gotten up to. If you want to read it on your own though, My Hero Academia School Briefs has multiple books that you can find in English on Amazon right now, and you could even start reading it right through the app, with Amazon I believe having a digital version as well. And this isn't sponsored or anything, I have no sponsorship or any link to give you, like, it's all on you. Go out there and find it. The official fantasy alternate universe. My Hero Academia has had a number of alternate universes officially crafted by the author Horikoshi, but the most popular one in the entire fandom is the Fantasy AU, otherwise known as UA Quest. This fantasy version of My Hero Academia comes from a color page that Horikoshi drew for a popularity poll, featuring the characters in a fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons type setting, and instead of just drawing a bunch of random awesome outfits, fans could pull a little lore out of the association between the characters, their supposed classes, and what they were wearing or doing. This AU's popularity would massively blow up when it was used as the setting for the ending of My Hero Academia Season 2, further fleshing out the fantasy world by adding more characters to the mix and even sending them on a little quest where ultimately Deku saves everyone using a sword filled with the power of All Might. In the second fantasy popularity poll color page, we see our characters as time has been going on, with Deku and Bakugo splitting halves of All Might's sword as they ride a strange lizard-like creature along of Hawks, All Might, and Ida, with Todoroki lingering in the background with half of his face looking like it was cursed with some sort of demonic black ice. And for the first time in a popularity poll, we also see Endeavor and Best Jeanist looking on trying to save him. And further fleshing out the classes of different characters, we can also see Momo wearing some sort of armor and what seems to be wizard's gloves, and Kirishima, who seems to be some sort of bandit or thief. And as far as Kirishima goes, people have headcanon Kirishima to be the dragon that Bakugo has during the ending, and this was actually made canon, or I guess as close as you can get to canon, by the School Briefs offer when they wrote about the AU. And finally, in the most recent and possibly final nod to the fantasy AU, we see everyone together looking like experienced adventurers instead of newbies, all wearing new armor. Shoto looks like he's happy and conquered whatever that issue was that he had before, with Deku and Bakugo wielding new swords and padding made from the creatures that they were standing on in the last poll. Best of all, there's actually a long chapter dedicated to UA Quest and MHA School Briefs Volume 3, detailing their world, its map, and all of the characters as they go on an adventure together. Hero Disappearances. There are several characters who've gone missing over the history of My Hero Academia's Hero Society. Kirishima's favorite hero is a man named Crimson Riot, who is basically his All Might. We know very little about Crimson Riot, but he did seem to be very popular during his time. Crimson Riot apparently went missing one day, and no one knows where he went, but many assume him to be dead for some reason, although Kirishima still does hold out hope that his idol is out there. Now, many fans have theorized that Crimson Riot has actually become the monster Gigantomachia, and I could see why you would say that, but I actually don't believe this to be the case. But why? Well, we'll discuss Machia's true identity a little further down in the iceberg, but how can we tell that it isn't likely to be Crimson Riot? Well, in Mina's backstory, we see Gigantomachia going after a hero named Springer, and he asks Mina for directions to the Springer Hero Agency as he walks towards it, saying everything is for his master. Now, I believe that that hero that he was after, Springer, was actually the owner of the Spring-like Limbs quirk that both Shigaraki and All for One have used, and that Machia was sent after Springer to bring him to All for One so that All for One could take his quirk. This mirrors how All for One uses the assassins to go after Deku, but sadly for Springer, with the doctor around, All for One would be able to keep the quirk factor viable for extraction with just a body. So Machia likely hunted Springer down and brought his body to the doctor, who then gave the quirk to All for One. If All for One was sending Machia after powerful heroes to take their quirks and bring them back to him to build up his power for the eventual All Might fight or for Shigaraki, then it makes sense that Machia would be sent after a hero like Crimson Riot, who likely had a quirk that All for One just wanted, but that was popular enough that he would likely pose a big enough threat that he couldn't just send a Nomu or number 6 from Vigilantes. So at the very least, it's possible that Crimson Riot can't be Machia because he was taken out by Machia. Kurogiri. Characters don't only go missing in MHA while they're alive. Sometimes when a situation comes up that demands it, All for One and the Doctor decide that even the afterlife isn't too far to reach when looking for interesting quirks to steal. This leads to the creation of the Nomu program, where bodies are turned into creatures like we've explained earlier, but there are some special Nomu created for very specific purposes. We know that Kurogiri used to be Aizawa and President Mike's friend Shirakumo, but many, especially those who haven't read Vigilantes, don't know that the entire story of those events is detailed in the spin-off manga. Kurogiri was specifically created to be a caretaker for Shigaraki during All for One's recovery and the time that he spends in Tartarus. But with someone with a temperament like Shigaraki, All for One and the Doctor wanted a quirk user who could effectively make him stop if he ever got out of control or tried to break something that he wasn't supposed to. To this end, they attempted to create a situation where they could recover Aizawa's body after a tragic incident to use his erasure not only as a perfect tool to keep Shigaraki in check, but also as a perfect asset for him to use once he eventually took over All for One, since obviously this would make Shigaraki invincible even against One for All. Despite this, we know that it was actually Shirakumo Oboro who was accidentally flattened and taken in by the doctor in All for One, who faked the medical records at the hospital as they took him to turn him into Shigaraki's caretaker. But little did they know that the same qualities that they were looking for in Aizawa were also present in Shirakumo, if not more, meaning that they could use Shirakumo's feelings of wanting to protect Aizawa and his friends to make Kurogiri's programming for Shigaraki all the more powerful, which is a really dark way for these characters to twist one character's love for his friends to their own means, but it's also a great example of the Doctor in All for One and their wicked ways. The Winged Nomu. Another example of this evil, though, is the notorious Winged Nomu. In Season 2 of My Hero Academia during the Stained Arc, Deku is snatched by a Winged Nomu at the end of the fight that seemingly singled him out for some reason. We know that Nomu keeps some of the behaviors from when they were normal people, and although they typically don't have any self-control over themselves, small fragments may still remain that influence their behavior. We eventually found out from Horikoshi that this character, Tsubasa, is the Winged Nomu in an official comment. Now, the interesting thing about that family name is that Tsubasa is the same family name as the doctor who told Deku that he didn't have a quirk in episode 1. This Dr. Tsubasa is actually All for One's doctor, Kyurei Garaki, who lived in this town and operated these small centers as a ruse, and we've already discussed that a little earlier on. Now, in my opinion, it would be a very huge coincidence that the doctor just happened to live in Deku's town, that his grandson would be friends of Deku, and that Deku would end up in that doctor's office, but it isn't if you believe in the theory that we discussed at the beginning of the video. And we learn later on in the story of MHA that the doctor actually has a number of facilities where he takes quirk users to either help them become off-brand Shigaraki backups or what they usually end up becoming, which were the Nomu that make up the villain's army. Tsubasa likely ended up in a facility like these, and very well could have been in the same one that Dabi was in at some point before the story began. Mutant Quirk Discrimination. Mutant quirks are quirks that permanently change the appearance of the user, regardless of if they give the user an ability or not. There are groups of people in My Hero Academia, though, and organizations directly against the existence of mutant quirk users, either on the premise that they're blurring the lines of what a human is anymore, or that they're dangerous and unsightly. Now, we've seen a little bit of this as the series has built up, with the most prominent example before the final arc being completely cut out of the anime's 5th season, the Creature Rejection Clan. And you may actually remember them from Season 6 of My Hero Academia, where they were used as a flashback and actually added back into the anime. The CRC is a cult-like organization in this fictional world that stages attacks on mutant quirk users and gathers in dark robes to plot their next move, but the group is wiped out by the League of Villains after they make a rude remark about Spinner while the League is looking for a new home. Based. Later on in the story, during the Vigilante Deku arc, we see a group of men attacking a tall fox girl just for walking around at night and looking the way she does, even though she's thick as oatmeal. During the final arc, we see this plotline come to a head as Spinner and All for One organize a mutant quirk uprising to take back Kurogiri and change the face of Japan, with Spinner as their brainwashed leader. But Shoji shares his history facing discrimination and attacks in his hometown out in the woods, and eventually everyone agrees to just be nice until their abusers change their minds or something. I really don't know. I didn't like this plotline, honestly. I really didn't like how that was handled. But it's safe to say that this is still a very big problem that isn't anywhere near handled in MHA, but it doesn't feel like it will be, as it feels outside of the scope of what Horikoshi intends to handle in this final arc, meaning we may just have to headcanon that Shoji somehow puts an end to discrimination during his time as a hero. Ochako pukes rainbows. For some reason, whenever Ochako pukes, she pukes rainbows. Now, this is likely just a visual gag, like Deku and his mom's tears being so massive that they've flooded their entire house before, but some fans have made a joke headcanon that Ochako is able to throw up the light spectrum all because of her control over gravity, which is the only thing that can trap light. So maybe thanks to her quirk, Ochako has somehow become a radiant being of light, transcending humanity as the true quirk singularity. Now, honestly, that might not be the reason that Ochako pukes rainbows, but it's way better than puking out Taco Bell, which for some strange reason we'll be discussing. The My Hero Academia Iceberg still has a long way to go, as we've just broken the surface of the water, so in order to truly unpack what My Hero Academia has to do with Taco Bell and the back you go theory, we're gonna have to go even deeper.